Zola was a young girl living in a small African village surrounded by lush green fields and vast open skies. She had always been known for her kind heart and sharp mind, traits that made her beloved by many in the village. She dreamed of becoming a healer, just like her late mother, and often spent time with the village elder, learning about herbs and remedies. Despite her hardships, she remained hopeful and determined, believing that one day she would achieve her dreams. Her stepmother, however, was a woman of a different nature. She was greedy, envious, and cared little for Zola's well-being. Ever since Zola's father had passed away, she had treated the girl as nothing more than an extra mouth to feed. She resented Zola's intelligence and kindness, for they reminded her too much of the man she had once married out of convenience, not love. With him gone, she saw Zola as an obstacle to her own selfish ambitions. Life had not been easy for Zola since her father's death. The love and security she once knew had vanished, replaced by endless chores and cold indifference. She was forced to work from dawn until dusk, fetching water, gathering firewood, and cleaning their small home, while her stepmother and her own daughters enjoyed the comforts Zola was denied. Hunger became a constant companion, as she was often given only scraps to eat. Yet through it all, Zola held on to the lessons her father had taught her: to stay strong, to never lose hope, and to trust that destiny had a plan for her. In the quiet moments when she was alone, she would sit by the river, watching the water flow freely, wishing that one day she too could escape the life that had been forced upon her. She knew deep in her heart that she was meant for more than this life of servitude. But for now, she had no choice but to endure, unaware that fate was already setting events into motion that would change her life forever. As days turned into months, Zola's stepmother grew more restless. She had always seen Zola as an unwanted burden, an extra mouth to feed with no benefit in return. Unlike her own daughters, who she believed would bring her wealth through advantageous marriages, Zola was nothing more than an orphaned girl, with no dowry and no family to protect her. The stepmother often muttered under her breath about how much easier life would be without Zola in the house. One evening, as she sat gossiping with the village women, she overheard talk of a wealthy old man from a neighboring village. He was searching for a young bride, someone to tend to his home and provide him with companionship in his old age. The man was known for his riches, but he was also feared. His previous wives had either fled or mysteriously disappeared, yet no one dared to speak against him. To the stepmother, this was not a warning, it was an opportunity. Without hesitation, she devised a wicked plan. She approached the old man, flattering him with words of admiration and promises. She told him that she had a girl in her home, young, obedient, and untouched by any man. She exaggerated Zola's beauty, making her sound like the perfect bride. But when the old man asked about dowry, the stepmother waved her hand dismissively. "No need for that," she said with a greedy smile. "Just a generous gift for the family, and she is yours." The deal was struck in secret. Zola had no idea what had been planned for her until it was too late. One morning, her stepmother woke her before dawn, handing her a bundle of clothes. "Dress yourself," she ordered coldly. "Today, you leave this house for good." Confused and frightened, Zola tried to ask where she was going, but her stepmother refused to answer. It wasn't until she was taken to the village square that she realized the horrifying truth. The old man stood there, waiting for her with a pleased smile, his wrinkled hands clasped together in satisfaction. Zola's heart pounded in her chest as the reality sank in. "No, I won't go with him," she cried, stepping back in desperation. "You can't do this to me." Her stepmother's eyes turned cold. "You are nothing but a burden. Be grateful someone is willing to take you in." Zola turned to the villagers, hoping someone would speak up for her, hoping someone would stop this injustice, but no one did. The elders turned their gazes away, unwilling to interfere. The rich old man's influence was too great, and the village had long learned that challenging him would bring trouble. Tears blurred Zola's vision as she was dragged away. The stepmother smirked, pleased with herself. She had gotten rid of the girl, and in return, she had secured wealth for her own daughters. She believed the matter was settled, but fate was not so easily controlled. Destiny had other plans for Zola, plans that would soon shake the world around them. Zola's journey to her new husband's home felt like a funeral march. As she was taken away, her heart pounded with fear, each step pulling her further from the only life she had ever known. The path wound through dense forests and dry fields until they finally arrived at the old man's village. His home was a large, impressive compound, far grander than the simple huts of her own village. The walls were made of thick clay, the roof thatched with fine materials, and servants moved about in silence. But despite its outward beauty, the place felt cold, lifeless. The moment she stepped inside, Zola felt like a prisoner. The air was thick with unease, and though the house was full of people, no one met her gaze. The servants hurried past her as if afraid to acknowledge her presence. The old man, her so-called husband, led her through the halls, speaking not as a partner, but as a master. "You will not leave these walls without my permission," he warned. "You will do as I say, and in return, you will have food, clothing, and a roof over your head. That is more than you had before." Zola said nothing, her fists clenched at her sides. She had no illusions about this arrangement. This was not a marriage. It was ownership. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of her new life set in. The old man dictated her every move. She was expected to wake before dawn to serve him, to eat only after he had finished his meals, and to remain silent unless spoken to. Her dreams of becoming a healer, of learning from the wise women of the village, were crushed beneath his cruel laughter. "Women have no place meddling in such things," he scoffed when she once dared to speak of her interests. "Your place is here, by my side, obeying me." Loneliness became Zola's constant companion. Unlike in her childhood home, where she had at least the comfort of the village, here she was truly alone. The servants avoided her, their faces blank with forced indifference. She could see the fear in their eyes. They too were trapped. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. But where would she go? The village was far, the roads dangerous, and she had no allies. The old man believed she was completely under his control. He believed she had no fight left in her. But deep in her heart, a fire still burned. She was not ready to surrender to this life. She did not know how or when, but one day she would find a way to reclaim her freedom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but Zola refused to accept her fate. Every morning, she woke up to the same routine: silent meals, suffocating rules, and the ever-present shadow of her husband looming over her. The walls of his grand home felt tighter with each passing day, but deep inside her, a fire still burned. She would not let this be the end of her story. At first, she observed quietly, learning the patterns of the household. She noted which servants were loyal to the old man and which ones avoided his gaze. She memorized the times when the gates were opened for traders and when the guards seemed the least alert. Slowly, she began searching for cracks in her gilded cage, ways she could slip through unnoticed. One evening, while pretending to gather water from the well, she noticed an elderly woman sitting beneath a great baobab tree. Unlike the other villagers who averted their eyes when she passed, this woman met Zola's gaze with a knowing smile. There was something wise and gentle about her, something that made Zola pause. "You carry the weight of a caged bird," the woman murmured as Zola approached. "But even the strongest cage can break when the time is right." Zola hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "How do you know?" she whispered. The woman chuckled softly. "Because I have seen many before you, and I have lived long enough to know that no man, not even the one you call husband, can outrun his own fate." Desperate for guidance, Zola risked speaking with her in secret whenever she could. The woman, whom she came to know as Mama Jua, was once a healer, wise in the ways of herbs, spirits, and destiny. She did not offer easy solutions, nor did she promise miracles, but she taught Zola patience and courage. Rushing without a plan will only put you in greater danger, Mama Jua warned one evening. You must wait, watch, and when the moment is right, strike like the hidden snake. And so Zola waited, but she did not wait idly. She listened, she learned, and soon she began to uncover the whispers of a dark secret, one that could be the key to her escape. The old man, for all his wealth and power, was hiding something. Servants spoke in hushed voices about a past filled with cruelty, of wives before her who had disappeared without a trace. Some believed he had used dark magic to maintain his strength. Others feared he had bribed village elders to cover up his crimes. One night, Zola overheard something that sent a chill through her bones. The chief's son is growing suspicious, a servant murmured to another. If he discovers the truth, it will be the end of our master. Zola's heart pounded. Whatever this truth was, it had the power to bring the old man down. For the first time since she had been taken from her home, she felt something more powerful than fear: hope. The more Zola listened, the clearer the whispers became. Servants spoke in hurried voices when they thought no one was near. The village women avoided the old man's house, and the elders looked away whenever his name was mentioned. Something was wrong, something deeper than just his cruel nature. Determined, Zola paid closer attention, piecing together fragments of conversations. One evening, she overheard two guards speaking near the storeroom. The chief's son is asking too many questions, one muttered. If he finds out what happened to the last wife, it will be the end of us all. Zola's breath caught in her throat. The last wife. Another time, while sweeping the courtyard, she saw a nervous trader refuse to meet the old man's eyes. I want no part in this, the man said, backing away. The land you took was never yours to claim. One day, the ancestors will take their revenge. Zola's mind raced. Had her husband stolen land from others? Had he harmed innocent people to gain his wealth? That night, she met with Mama Jua under the great baobab tree. The old woman sat calmly, watching the stars. Something terrible happened here, didn't it? Zola asked. Something my husband is trying to hide. Mama Jua nodded slowly. Long ago, before he was a rich man, he was nothing. But he wanted power, and so he took what was not his: land, cattle, even lives. The ancestors do not forget such things. Zola clenched her fists. If I can prove what he did, the village will turn against him. He won't be able to keep me here. A faint smile crossed the wise woman's face. You are clever, child, but be careful. A snake is most dangerous when cornered. Determined, Zola sought help from those who had reason to despise the old man: disgruntled servants, frightened villagers, and even traders who had been cheated by him. Slowly, she gathered evidence. Late one night, she followed a servant carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She watched as he buried it beneath a large stone near the riverbank. The next morning, when no one was looking, she dug it up. Inside, she found documents: land deeds with forged signatures, records of stolen goods, and even a faded cloth belonging to a woman who had vanished years ago. Zola's hands trembled as she stared at the proof. This was it. This was what she needed. The old man had built his fortune on corruption and bloodshed. Now, it was time for justice to take its course. Zola knew she couldn't wait any longer. The evidence she had gathered was enough to destroy the old man's reputation, but she needed to get away before he realized what she had discovered. She had spent weeks planning, memorizing the guards' shifts, and mapping out the quickest route out of the compound. If she could reach the next village, she could find someone willing to help her. One moonless night, she slipped out of her sleeping quarters, moving as silently as the wind. The guards were gathered around a fire near the front gate, laughing and drinking, their attention elsewhere. Her heart pounded as she crept toward the side wall, where she had loosened some stones days earlier. With careful hands, she pulled them free and squeezed through the narrow opening. For the first time in months, she felt the night air against her skin as she stepped onto the open path leading away from the house. Freedom was within reach. But just as she took her first steps toward escape, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Where do you think you're going, little bird?" Zola froze. A torch flared to life, illuminating the cruel smirk of one of the old man's most loyal guards. Before she could react, rough hands seized her, dragging her back through the opening. She fought, kicking and clawing, but more guards arrived, their grip ironclad. "Trying to run, are you?" one of them sneered. "Master will not be pleased." They hauled her back into the compound, where the old man was already waiting, his expression a terrifying mask of rage. He did not speak at first, only stared at her with dark, calculating eyes. Then, without warning, he struck her hard across the face. "You ungrateful wretch," he hissed. "After everything I have given you, this is how you repay me." Zola refused to cry out. She held her head high, even as pain burned through her cheek. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The old man turned to the guards. "Take her to the storeroom. Lock her inside. No food. No water. Let's see how long she lasts before she learns her lesson." The guards dragged her away, shoving her into the dark, airless room and locking the door behind her. Alone in the suffocating space, Zola sank to the ground, her body aching, her stomach hollow with fear. She had failed. As the night stretched on, she heard approaching footsteps. The door creaked open, and to her horror, her stepmother stepped inside, carrying a lantern and a triumphant smirk. "I heard about your little escape attempt," the woman sneered. "Did you really think you could run from the life I gave you?" Zola glared at her, refusing to answer. Her stepmother chuckled. "You thought suffering under my roof was bad? That was nothing compared to what awaits you now. The old man won't let you out of his sight after this. You belong to him now, body and soul." Zola's fingers dug into the dirt floor as her stepmother leaned closer, lowering her voice to a cruel whisper. "You will never be free." With that, she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. Zola sat in the darkness, her heart pounding. The old man had tightened his grip, her stepmother had come to gloat, and escape now seemed more impossible than ever. But despite the pain, despite the hopelessness, one thought burned in her mind. This is not over. Days passed in darkness, but Zola did not break. Hunger gnawed at her, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs, yet she held on to one thing: hope. Her stepmother's cruel words still echoed in her mind, but she refused to believe them. "I will be free. This is not over." Then, just as despair threatened to take hold, fate intervened. A great village chief arrived from a distant land, a man known for his fairness and wisdom. He had come to settle disputes and hear grievances from the people. His presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the village. Wherever he went, people whispered, afraid yet intrigued by what his visit could mean. Zola, still locked away, heard the murmurs through the cracks in the storeroom walls. Villagers were speaking more openly now, and the rumors about her husband's dark past were growing louder. The chief's visit had stirred something, a sense of justice long buried beneath fear. One evening, the door to her prison creaked open, and Mama Jua slipped inside, carrying a small bundle of food and water. "Eat, child," she whispered. "You need your strength." Zola gratefully accepted, swallowing the dry bread and water as fast as she could. "Mama Jua, the chief—" "I know," the old woman interrupted gently. "The ancestors have sent him for a reason." Zola's hands clenched. "This is my chance. If he hears what my husband has done—" Mama Jua placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Patience, child. A fire that burns too fast will destroy itself. The chief is a man of justice, but you must wait for the right moment to act." Zola took a deep breath, nodding. She had learned from her first failed escape. Recklessness would only trap her further. This time, she would be careful. She would be smart. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Servants spoke in hushed voices, recalling how past wives of the old man had vanished without explanation. Traders who had been cheated by him found the courage to speak. The villagers, long silenced by fear, began to question whether their wealthy neighbor was truly as untouchable as he seemed. And so, the tide began to turn. Zola didn't know exactly how or when her chance would come, but she felt it in her bones. Justice was coming. And when the moment arrived, she would be ready. The winds of change swept through the village like an approaching storm. The rumors about the old man had grown into undeniable truths, whispered in every corner, spoken in cautious tones, yet carrying the weight of justice long overdue. The visiting chief had heard them too. He had watched the fear in the villagers' eyes, seen the reluctance in their faces. He knew something was being hidden. Zola, still held captive but no longer hopeless, waited. She had learned the power of patience. And then the moment she had prayed for arrived. One morning, the village square filled with people. The chief had called for a gathering. "I have heard many things since my arrival," he announced. "Dark things, crimes buried beneath silence." His deep voice carried authority, making even the elders shift uncomfortably. Zola's heart pounded as she listened from inside her prison. Mama Jua had told her to wait for the right moment. Was this it? Then, a voice called out. It was a servant, one of the old man's own. He stepped forward, trembling but determined. "Great chief," he said, "I have seen the truth of these whispers with my own eyes." Gasps filled the air. No one had ever dared to speak openly against the old man before. Emboldened, others stepped forward. A trader spoke of stolen land. A grieving woman told of her sister who had vanished after being forced into marriage. Even some of the elders, once complicit in their silence, hesitated. Fear of the old man was powerful, but fear of justice, of the ancestors' wrath, was greater. The old man, seated among them, stood abruptly. His voice was sharp, demanding. "Lies! You believe the words of cowards?" He turned to the elders. "I have given this village wealth, protection, but the power he once held was slipping like sand through his fingers. No one defended him. No one dared." Then a cry rang out from the edge of the crowd. "Let her speak!" All eyes turned as Zola was led forward. Mama Jua had helped her, guiding her out of the shadows at the perfect moment. She was weak from captivity, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She met the chief's gaze and spoke without fear. "I was sold like an animal," she said, her voice steady. "I have seen the truth of this man. I have proof." From the folds of her dress, she revealed the stolen land deeds, the forged documents, the cloth of a missing woman. She had hidden them well, knowing this day would come. The final, undeniable evidence. A heavy silence followed. Then, the chief spoke. "This is more than greed. This is a betrayal of the people, of the ancestors themselves." The old man stumbled back, his face paling. He turned to the elders, searching for support, but they looked away. Even his most loyal guards had stepped back. His power had vanished. The chief raised his hand. "By the laws of this land, your status is revoked. Your wealth is nothing but stolen blood. You will answer for your crimes." And just like that, the old man fell. As he was dragged away, screaming of revenge, the village erupted, not in fear, but in relief. Zola stood tall, breathing in the fresh air of freedom. She had done it. Justice had won. As the old man was dragged away, his furious shouts fading into the distance, another figure in the crowd began to tremble. Zola's stepmother. She had spent years believing herself untouchable, hiding behind the old man's power. But now, that shield was gone, leaving her exposed like a snake caught in the open. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. If the villagers turned their attention to her, what would stop them from seeking revenge for all the pain she had caused? She took a cautious step back, then another. But before she could slip away, a sharp voice rang out. "And what about her?" The villagers turned. The voice belonged to a woman Zola recognized, the mother of a boy who had once worked in her stepmother's house. The boy had been beaten for breaking a clay pot, thrown out with nothing. The woman's eyes blazed with fury now. "She sold Zola like a piece of cattle," the woman continued. "What else has she done?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Suspicion quickly turned into accusation. "She stole from my harvest," shouted an elderly farmer. "I saw her take coins meant for the village," cried another. A former servant stepped forward. "She lied to the elders about the debts she owed, forced others to pay for her crimes." The stepmother paled. "Lies!" she shrieked. "You cannot prove anything." But unlike before, the villagers were no longer afraid to speak. One by one, they came forward with their stories. How she had cheated traders, bullied the weak, and hoarded food while others went hungry. The chief watched in silence, letting the truth pour out like a dam breaking. When the voices finally quieted, he turned to Zola. "What do you say, child?" Zola met her stepmother's wild, desperate eyes. There was a time when she had feared this woman, when she had let herself believe she was powerless against her cruelty, but not anymore. She lifted her chin. "She never cared for me," Zola said. "She saw me as nothing more than a burden, until she found a way to sell me for her own gain. Everything they say is true. She does not deserve this village's mercy." A heavy silence fell. Then, the chief nodded. "Then she will face judgment." The villagers erupted, their anger reaching its peak. Some called for exile, others demanded repayment for all she had stolen. The stepmother fell to her knees begging, but no one came to her aid. In the end, it was decided. She would be stripped of all status, forced to repay what she had taken, and cast out from the village to fend for herself. As she was dragged away, screaming and cursing, Zola felt no pity. Her stepmother had spent years ensuring that she suffered. Now, fate had delivered its justice. And for the first time in a long while, Zola was finally free. As the dust settled and the village reclaimed its peace, Zola stood in the center of it all, breathing deeply. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was free. No shackles bound her. No cruel voices loomed over her. She was no longer a prisoner of fate, but the master of her own destiny. When she returned to her home village, the people who had once turned a blind eye to her suffering now welcomed her with open arms. Women embraced her, their eyes filled with guilt and admiration. The elders, who had once ignored her stepmother's cruelty, lowered their heads in shame. "You are stronger than all of us," one of the elders admitted. "We should have listened. We should have helped." Zola did not dwell on their past silence. She had learned that fear kept many from doing what was right. But now, things had changed. If her suffering could bring justice, then she would make sure no other girl endured what she had. She met with the village leaders and spoke of the need to protect young girls from being sold into forced marriages. She worked with the traders and farmers to create a system where no one could take another's land unjustly. And with Mama Jua's guidance, she started a safe place for women and children, where they could learn, heal, and dream of futures they once thought impossible. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant gold and crimson, Zola sat beneath the great baobab tree, where it had all begun. Mama Jua sat beside her, watching the horizon with a knowing smile. "You were right, Mama Jua," Zola said softly. "Destiny does find a way." The wise woman chuckled. "Ah, child, destiny is stubborn, just like you. When something is meant to be, no amount of cruelty or injustice can stop it." Zola smiled, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face. She had once believed her life would be nothing but pain and suffering. But now, She saw the truth. She had been forged by fire, not consumed by it. Her story was no longer one of survival. It was a story of hope, a story of change, a story of a girl who refused to be broken and, in doing so, became the light that others would follow. Days passed, then weeks. Zola's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. No longer a victim, she had become a symbol of resilience and justice in her village. Yet, just as she believed her journey had reached its conclusion, destiny had one more revelation waiting for her. One evening, as she helped Mama Jua tend to a group of young girls learning to read, an unfamiliar figure arrived in the village, a man dressed in fine yet travel-worn clothes. He carried himself with the air of someone who had seen much of the world, but his eyes softened when they landed on Zola. "You are the daughter of Kwame," he said, his voice deep with emotion. Zola's breath caught in her throat. Her father. The man she had lost so long ago. She had always known he was kind and hard-working, but little else. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "Did you know him?" The man nodded. "I was his closest friend, and I have come to fulfill a promise I made to him." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Zola, his hands trembling slightly. When she unwrapped it, she gasped. Inside was a collection of documents, land deeds, letters, and a small carved pendant she recognized from her childhood. "Your father was not just a simple farmer," the man explained. "He was a man of great honor, and he had wealth, not in gold, but in land. Before he passed, he entrusted these to me, knowing that if anything happened to him, you might be denied what was rightfully yours." Zola's heart pounded as she scanned the documents. The land deeds bore her father's name, vast fertile lands outside the village that no one had ever spoken of. "But why didn't my stepmother tell me?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. The man's expression darkened. "Because she wanted it for herself. She never intended for you to know the truth. But your father's last wish was that you should inherit everything. It is all yours now, Zola." Tears welled in her eyes, not just because of the inheritance, but because, after all these years, her father had still been watching over her in some way. He had ensured that she would one day stand on her own, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as the rightful heir to his legacy. Mama Jua placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "You see, child, destiny is never cruel without reason. You have suffered, but now the ancestors have restored what was stolen from you." Zola closed her eyes, letting the weight of the revelation settle within her. With this land, she could help even more people. She could create something lasting, not just for herself, but for the village, for the girls who had no voice, for the future. She turned to the man and bowed her head. "Thank you for keeping my father's promise." The man smiled. "He would be proud of you, Zola. More than you will ever know." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet, Zola knew that this was not just an ending. It was a beginning, a future filled with purpose, strength, and the undeniable truth that she had not just survived her past, she had conquered it. In the weeks that followed, Zola worked tirelessly to ensure that no other girl in the village would suffer as she had. She stood before the elders, the villagers, and even the once silent leaders who had turned away in fear. "No child should be sold into marriage," she declared. "No girl should be treated as property, and no family should be able to trade away their daughters for wealth." The village elders, humbled by their past mistakes, listened. With the guidance of the visiting chief, they agreed to implement strict laws forbidding forced marriages and the selling of young girls. Any man who sought to take a wife would have to prove that she had chosen him freely, without coercion. Families who tried to force their daughters into marriage would face exile, Zola also took it upon herself to expose the hidden corruption in the village. With the documents left by her father and the testimonies of those who had once been afraid to speak, she helped uncover years of deceit, land stolen from poor farmers, merchants cheated by dishonest leaders, and wealth hoarded by the powerful while others starved. Some of those exposed tried to resist, but the villagers, now emboldened, stood firm. The truth had come to light, and there was no going back. Through it all, Zola remained strong. Many expected her to seek revenge on those who had wronged her. Her stepmother, the village elders who had ignored her cries, the servants who had turned a blind eye. But Zola did not let bitterness consume her. One afternoon, as she stood beneath the great baobab tree, a familiar figure approached, her stepmother. No longer dressed in fine robes, she looked worn and weary, her once proud expression replaced with one of shame. "I have lost everything," she whispered. "I have no home, no family, nothing." Zola studied the woman who had tormented her for so many years. She had dreamed of this moment, of seeing her stepmother reduced to nothing. But as she looked at the defeated woman before her, she realized something. She did not need revenge. She had already won. "You made me suffer," Zola said quietly. "You stole from me, you sold me, and you tried to break me. But I survived, and I will never let anyone else suffer the way I did." Her stepmother lowered her head, unable to meet Zola's gaze. "I do not hate you," Zola continued, "but I will never forget what you did." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the past behind her. In time, Zola's story spread beyond her village. Travelers spoke of the young woman who had defied fate and reshaped her people's future. She became a voice for those who had none, a leader who fought for justice. And though she had once been a girl with no hope, no freedom, and no power, she now stood as something far greater, a symbol of change, a warrior of destiny, and a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, always finds its way. As the years passed, Zola's name became one spoken with respect and admiration. No longer a girl bound by suffering, she had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience in a world that once tried to silence her. She walked through the village with her head held high, not as a victim, but as a leader. Girls who once feared for their futures now had choices. Families who once saw daughters as burdens now saw them as blessings. The laws she had helped put in place ensured that no child would be sold into marriage again. One evening, as she stood atop the hill overlooking the village, Mama Jua joined her, leaning on her staff. "You have done well, child," she said with a knowing smile. Zola smiled back. "I only did what was right." The old woman chuckled. "And that is why you succeeded. You turned your pain into strength, your suffering into wisdom. That is the true power of destiny. It does not break us. It shapes us." Zola looked out at the village, at the children laughing, the women walking freely, the men treating their daughters with newfound respect. She had once thought her fate was sealed, that she would always be a prisoner of cruelty and despair. But she had been wrong. Fate had challenged her, but she had fought back. Justice had been delayed, but it had found its way. And now, as she stood beneath the vast sky, she knew that her story was more than one of survival. It was a story of victory, of destiny's triumph, of a girl who had once been powerless but had become the force that changed everything.